The morning sun burned over the desert sand as Sarah Mitchell wiped sweat from her forehead. She was 24 years old and never imagined her life would lead her here. The military base buzzed with activity around her. Soldiers moved in organized chaos, preparing for another dangerous mission into enemy territory. Sarah wasn't a soldier, though. She was a logistics specialist, someone who made sure the fighters had what they needed to survive. Her job was simple but critical. She loaded ammunition into crates, checked supply lists, and made sure every bullet reached the right person at the right time. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody would write stories about someone who counted bullets and carried boxes, but Sarah took pride in it anyway. She knew that without people like her, the combat teams couldn't do their jobs. The base was located in a remote region where tensions ran high every single day. Insurgents controlled the surrounding areas, and attacks happened without warning. Every supply run was dangerous. Every mission could turn deadly in seconds. Sarah had seen wounded soldiers return from operations, their faces pale and their eyes haunted. She had watched helicopters bring back the dead. War wasn't like the movies. It was loud, confusing, and terrifying. Sarah grew up in a small town in Montana. Her father worked at a lumber mill and her mother taught elementary school. They raised her to be tough and independent. When money got tight after her father injured his back, Sarah knew college wasn't an option. She needed to work, and the military offered good pay with benefits. She signed up as soon as she turned 18. Basic training was harder than anything she had ever done. The drill sergeant screamed in her face. She ran until her legs felt like rubber. She crawled through mud under barbed wire while instructors fired blank rounds over her head. Some recruits quit. Sarah didn't. She pushed through every obstacle, driven by a stubborn refusal to fail. After basic training, she specialized in logistics and supply chain management. It wasn't the exciting combat role some recruits wanted, but it suited her organized mind. She was good with numbers and details. She never forgot an order or miscounted inventory. Her superiors noticed her reliability and eventually assigned her to this forward operating base in the desert. Life on the base followed strict routines. Sarah woke at 5 every morning, worked through the brutal heat of the day, and collapsed into her bunk at night. She made friends with other support staff. There was Rodriguez, a mechanic from Texas who could fix any vehicle. There was Chen, a communications specialist from California who always had a joke ready. And there was Marcus, a combat medic who had saved more lives than he could count. Marcus was the one who first suggested Sarah should learn more than just logistics. They sat in the mess hall one evening, eating bland military food under flickering fluorescent lights. Marcus pointed his fork at her and said she should take advantage of the training opportunities available on base. The base offered optional courses for support personnel: combat first aid, basic weapons handling, navigation and survival skills. Most support staff ignored these courses. They figured they'd never need such training. But Marcus insisted everyone should know how to defend themselves and help others in an emergency. Sarah started attending the weapons training sessions during her off hours. An older sergeant named Harrison ran the program. He was a former infantry soldier with 20 years of experience. He had scars on his arms and a bullet wound in his shoulder that ached when it rained. Harrison believed every person on a military base should know how to handle a rifle, regardless of their official job. The first time Sarah held an M4 carbine, her hands shook slightly. The weapon felt heavy and dangerous. Harrison showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to breathe properly before pulling the trigger. He explained that shooting wasn't about being aggressive. It was about being calm and controlled. Sarah discovered she had natural talent. Her shots grouped tightly on the targets. Her hand stayed steady even when her heart raced. Harrison raised his eyebrows in surprise when he checked her target after her first session. Most beginners scattered shots all over the place. Sarah's bullets punched through the paper in a tight cluster around the center. Harrison started spending extra time with her. He taught her about different weapon systems. He showed her how to maintain and clean firearms. He explained ballistics and wind resistance. He talked about the mental discipline required for precision shooting. Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge soaking up water. Weeks turned into months. Sarah continued her regular logistics work during the day and trained with weapons in the evening. She learned to shoot rifles, pistols, and eventually the heavier sniper systems. The sniper rifle felt different from other weapons. It required patience and perfect stillness. One tiny movement could send a bullet off course by several feet at long distances. Harrison told her she had the temperament for sniper work. She didn't get frustrated or impatient. She could lie still for extended periods, breathing slowly and waiting for the perfect moment. But Sarah laughed off his suggestions about joining a combat unit. She was happy with her logistics role. She didn't need to be a hero. Then Operation Steel Thunder was announced. Intelligence reported a high-value target hiding in a compound 20 miles from the base. A team of Navy SEALs would infiltrate the area, supported by Army Rangers and a handful of specialized personnel. They needed someone to manage the ammunition supply during the operation. Sarah volunteered immediately. The mission briefing took place in a secured room with maps covering every wall. The SEAL team leader, a compact man named Lieutenant Davis, explained the plan with military precision. They would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness. They would approach the compound on foot. They would neutralize enemy fighters and extract the target before dawn. Sarah's job was straightforward. She would accompany the team with extra ammunition, medical supplies, and emergency equipment. She would stay back from the direct combat zone, but remain close enough to resupply the fighters if needed. It was still dangerous, but it was within her capabilities. The night before the mission, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the desert wind howl outside. She thought about her parents back home, about her younger brother who was starting college, about the life she had left behind. She wondered if she would see another sunrise. Then she pushed those thoughts away and focused on the task ahead. The helicopter ride toward the operation zone felt like descending into hell. The aircraft shook and rattled as it flew low over the dark desert. Sarah sat surrounded by grim-faced warriors checking their weapons one final time. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the rotor blades chopping through the night air and the occasional crackle of radio communication. Sarah checked her own gear repeatedly. Ammunition magazines secured in her vest pockets. Medical kit strapped to her thigh. Water bottles full. Rifle loaded and safety engaged. Everything in its place. She took deep breaths and tried to calm her racing heart. The helicopter suddenly banked hard to the left. Warning lights flashed red inside the cabin. The pilot's voice crackled through everyone's headsets with urgent words that made Sarah's blood turn cold. Enemy fire erupted from the ground below. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like angry fireflies. The helicopter jerked violently as the pilot took evasive action. Sarah gripped her seat harness so tightly her knuckles turned white. This wasn't supposed to happen. The intelligence report said the area would be clear until they reached the compound. Lieutenant Davis shouted orders over the noise and chaos. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency despite the danger. They checked their equipment and prepared for an emergency landing. The helicopter shuddered as something struck its tail section. Metal groaned and hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cabin floor. The pilot fought for control as the aircraft spun in the air. Sarah felt her stomach flip. Everything seemed to move in slow motion and lightning speed at the same time. The ground rushed up to meet them. The pilot managed to level the helicopter at the last second, but the landing was brutal. The aircraft hit the sand hard, bounced once and slid sideways before finally stopping. Sarah's head slammed against the bulkhead despite her harness. Stars exploded across her vision. Her ears rang from the impact and the screaming of stressed metal. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what was happening. Then training kicked in. She unbuckled her harness with shaking hands and grabbed her rifle. The SEALs were already moving. They poured out of the damaged helicopter into the desert night. Lieutenant Davis dragged the injured pilot from his seat. The co-pilot was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Bullets continued to snap through the air around them. The enemy had spotted their crash site and was closing in. Sarah stumbled out of the helicopter on unsteady legs. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions under a sky full of cold stars. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness about 200 yards away. She could hear shouting in a foreign language. The enemy fighters were organizing an assault on their position. The SEALs established a defensive perimeter around the downed helicopter. They returned fire with disciplined bursts. Sarah dropped to the sand beside a SEAL named Jackson. He was a tall African-American man from Georgia, with a calm demeanor that never seemed to crack even under pressure. Jackson glanced at her and nodded once. No words were needed. Sarah opened her supply pack and began distributing ammunition magazines to the fighters. Her hands moved automatically despite her fear. This was what she trained for. This was her job. She crawled from position to position, delivering fresh magazines and collecting empty ones. Bullets kicked up sand around her, but she forced herself to keep moving. The battle intensified as more enemy fighters joined the attack. The SEALs were outnumbered and far from any support. The crashed helicopter had damaged its radio equipment, making it impossible to call for extraction. They were alone in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no way out. Lieutenant Davis made a quick decision. They couldn't stay at the crash site. The enemy would eventually overrun their position through sheer numbers. They needed to move to defensible terrain and establish communications. He spotted a rocky outcropping about half a mile to the north. It wasn't much, but it offered better protection than the open desert. The team prepared to move. They loaded the injured pilot and co-pilot onto makeshift stretchers. Sarah stuffed as much ammunition and supplies as she could carry into her pack. The weight nearly doubled, but she didn't complain. Every bullet might mean the difference between survival and death. They moved through the darkness in a tactical formation. The SEALs took turns providing covering fire while others advanced. Sarah stayed in the middle of the group with the wounded, her legs burned from carrying the heavy pack. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the cold desert night. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Enemy fighters pursued them across the open ground. Bullets buzzed past like angry hornets. One SEAL named Rodriguez took a round in his body armor that knocked him down but didn't penetrate. He got back up cursing and kept moving. These men were incredibly tough, Sarah realized. They had survived situations that would break ordinary people. The team reached the rocky outcropping just as dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. The rocks provided cover and elevation, giving them a tactical advantage. The SEALs immediately set up defensive positions. Jackson, who had specialized communications training, worked on rigging an emergency radio from salvaged parts. Sarah found herself positioned between two large boulders with a clear view of the approach routes. She checked her rifle for the 100th time. Loaded and ready. Safety off. She tried to remember everything Sergeant Harrison had taught her during those evening training sessions. Breathe slowly, stay calm. Pick your targets carefully. The enemy attack came with the sunrise. Dozens of fighters emerged from the desert, moving in coordinated groups. They had better numbers and knew the terrain. The SEALs opened fire with devastating accuracy. Each shot dropped an enemy fighter, but more kept coming. Sarah watched the battle unfold from her position. She saw Lieutenant Davis directing fire from an elevated rock. She saw the combat medic Marcus working frantically to stabilize the wounded co-pilot. She saw Jackson still struggling with the radio equipment while bullets chipped the rocks around him. Then she saw the sniper position. A SEAL named Thompson was set up on the highest point of the outcropping with a long-range rifle. He was systematically taking out enemy fighters at extreme distances. Each shot echoed across the desert like thunder. Thompson was incredibly skilled, dropping targets that Sarah could barely see with her naked eye. Thompson's rifle spoke again. Another enemy fighter fell. The incoming fire decreased noticeably. The enemy was learning to fear that position. They started taking cover and moving more cautiously. Thompson had changed the dynamics of the entire battle from his perch. Sarah continued distributing ammunition and helping where needed. She carried water to the fighters. She helped Marcus treat minor wounds. She stayed busy because staying busy kept the fear at bay. If she stopped moving and started thinking about their situation, the terror might overwhelm her. The battle raged for hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Sarah's water ran low. Everyone's water ran low. Dehydration became as dangerous as enemy bullets. Jackson finally got the emergency radio working and sent out a distress call. Help was coming, but it would take time. They just needed to hold out until extraction arrived. The SEALs continued fighting with professional determination. They conserved ammunition and made every shot count. The enemy fighters seemed endless, but they were taking heavy casualties. Bodies littered the approaches to the rock outcropping. Then disaster struck. Thompson shifted position to get a better angle on an enemy machine gun nest. A bullet caught him in the exposed gap between his shoulder and body armor. The impact spun him around and knocked him down behind the rocks. Sarah saw it happen from her position 30 feet away. She watched Thompson's rifle clatter onto the stones. She saw the blood spreading across his uniform. Marcus was already running toward the fallen sniper, medical kit in hand. But Sarah knew immediately that Thompson's fighting was done for this battle. Lieutenant Davis shouted orders, trying to reorganize the defense. Without Thompson's sniper fire, the enemy fighters grew bolder. They advanced closer, their shots more accurate. The SEAL team's situation deteriorated rapidly. They needed that sniper position active again. Marcus reached Thompson and began emergency treatment. The wound wasn't immediately fatal, but Thompson couldn't fight. He was in shock and losing blood. Marcus worked with swift competence, packing the wound and starting an IV line. Sarah stared at Thompson's abandoned rifle lying on the rocks. It was a specialized weapon system, much more powerful than the standard rifles the other SEALs carried. Through that scope, Thompson had been able to engage targets at distances the others couldn't match. That rifle had been their biggest advantage. Now it sat silent while the enemy pressed forward. Sarah made a decision without thinking about it. She dropped her supply pack and scrambled up the rocks toward Thompson's position. She heard Lieutenant Davis yell something behind her, but she didn't stop. Her training took over. Her body moved on instinct. Sarah reached the sniper position and grabbed Thompson's rifle with trembling hands. The weapon was heavier than anything she had fired before. It was a specialized long-range system designed for precision shots at extreme distances. She had seen similar rifles during her training with Sergeant Harrison, but she had never fired one in actual combat. She positioned herself behind the rocks exactly where Thompson had been. The view from this elevated position showed the entire battlefield stretched before her. She could see enemy fighters moving between sand dunes and rocky outcroppings. They were closer than she expected, much closer. Some were already within 300 yards of the SEAL position. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was completely different from shooting paper targets on a peaceful range. Real people were down there trying to kill her and everyone she was fighting alongside. Her hands shook as she settled the rifle against her shoulder. She pressed her eye to the scope and the world suddenly magnified. Through the powerful optic she could see individual faces. Young men with beards and wrapped headscarves. They carried AK-47 rifles and wore mismatched military gear. Some looked scared. Some looked determined. All of them wanted to kill the Americans trapped on this rocky outcropping. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly. She remembered Sergeant Harrison's voice in her head during those long training sessions. Don't think about the target as a person. Focus on the mechanics. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. Just like on the range. Just muscle memory and practice. She acquired her first target through the scope. An enemy fighter was setting up a machine gun behind a large rock about 400 yards away. If that machine gun opened fire, it would tear through the SEAL defensive positions. Sarah centered the crosshairs on the fighter's chest. She took a breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with surprising force. The boom echoed across the desert. Through the scope, Sarah saw the enemy fighter drop. The machine gun fell silent before it ever fired a shot. She had made the hit. Her first combat kill. She waited for some emotional reaction, but there was only a strange numbness and the immediate need to find the next target. The SEALs below noticed someone was manning the sniper position again. She heard Lieutenant Davis on the radio telling everyone that Mitchell was on the gun. There was surprise in his voice, but also approval. The team needed that position covered, and Sarah was doing it. She worked the bolt action, chambering a new round. The spent brass casing ejected and clinked against the rocks. She scanned for another target. An enemy fighter was exposed while running between positions. Sarah led him slightly, accounting for his movement, and fired. The man went down hard. The rifle became an extension of her body. Load, aim, breathe, fire. Each shot was a separate task requiring total concentration. She stopped thinking about the bigger picture and focused entirely on the immediate mechanics of shooting. Nothing existed except the scope view and the trigger. Enemy fighters started taking casualties from the elevated sniper position and began to realize the American sniper was active again. They became more cautious, staying behind cover and limiting their exposure. This was exactly what the SEALs needed. It gave them breathing room to reorganize and conserve their ammunition. Sarah shifted her focus to high-value targets. She spotted an enemy commander directing fighters from behind a disabled vehicle. She estimated the range at 500 yards. Wind was negligible. She adjusted her aim point slightly high to account for bullet drop, held her breath, and fired. The commander dropped. The enemy fighters around him scattered in confusion. Without clear leadership, their attack became disorganized. Some fighters retreated. Others continued forward, but without coordination. The SEALs exploited the confusion, picking off exposed targets with brutal efficiency. Minutes blurred together. Sarah lost count of how many rounds she fired. The rifle grew hot from repeated shots. Sweat dripped into her eyes, making it hard to see through the scope. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. But she kept shooting because stopping meant dying. Jackson finally established reliable radio contact with friendly forces. Help was coming. 2 Apache attack helicopters were inbound along with a rescue team. They just needed to hold for another 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when people were actively trying to kill you. The enemy fighters must have intercepted the same communications or sensed time running out. They launched a desperate, coordinated assault. Dozens of fighters rushed the SEAL position simultaneously from multiple directions. It was a suicide attack, but effective through sheer numbers. The SEALs opened fire with everything they had. Rifles chattered. Grenades exploded. The desert erupted into chaos and violence. Sarah focused on the most dangerous threats. An enemy fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. She dropped him before he could fire. Another fighter carrying explosives running straight at their position. She hit him at 200 yards. Her ammunition ran low. She grabbed a fresh magazine from Thompson's gear and reloaded. Her movements were automatic now. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just the endless cycle of acquiring targets and eliminating threats. An enemy bullet struck the rock inches from her head, spraying stone fragments across her face. She felt a sharp sting as something cut her cheek. Blood ran down her neck, but she ignored it. She adjusted her position slightly and kept firing. Jackson took a round through his thigh. He went down cursing. Marcus left the wounded co-pilot and crawled to Jackson, dragging his medical kit. The combat medic worked while bullets cracked overhead. He packed Jackson's wound and tied a tourniquet around his leg. Jackson never stopped returning fire even while being treated. Sarah saw another threat developing. A group of enemy fighters was flanking around the eastern side of the outcropping, trying to hit the SEAL position from an unexpected angle. If they succeeded, they would have clear shots at the Americans from close range. Sarah swiveled the rifle to engage this new threat. She fired rapidly, not taking time for perfect accuracy. Speed was more important than precision at this range. The first fighter went down. The second stumbled and fell. The third dove for cover. The flanking attempt stalled. Then she heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the distinctive whomp-whomp of helicopter rotors. She glanced up and saw 2 Apache gunships streaking across the sky like avenging angels. Their presence changed everything immediately. The Apaches opened fire with devastating effect. Their chain guns tore through enemy positions with surgical precision. Rockets streaked from their weapons pylons and exploded among the attacking fighters. The enemy attack collapsed instantly. Fighters scattered and ran, trying to escape the aerial onslaught. Sarah lowered her rifle and slumped against the rocks. Every muscle in her body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. She was vaguely aware of shouting and movement around her. The SEALs were consolidating their position and preparing for extraction. Lieutenant Davis climbed up to her position. His face was covered in dust and sweat. Blood stained his uniform from a wound Sarah hadn't noticed before. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe? Or disbelief, he asked if she was hit. Sarah touched her face and her fingers came away bloody from the rock fragment cut. She told him she was fine. Just a scratch. He nodded slowly and told her she had done good work. Real good work. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. The extraction helicopters landed in a storm of dust and noise. A fresh team of soldiers secured the area while medics rushed to help the wounded. They loaded Thompson first. He was stable but needed surgery. Jackson was next, cursing about how he could walk on his own. Then the pilot and co-pilot. Sarah gathered her gear with numb hands. She picked up Thompson's rifle carefully, treating it with respect. This weapon had saved all their lives today. Marcus appeared beside her and took the rifle gently. He told her Thompson would want to thank her personally when he recovered. They boarded the helicopter and lifted into the sky. Sarah stared out the open door at the battlefield receding below. Bodies scattered across the sand. Smoke rising from destroyed vehicles. The sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. It looked unreal, like a movie set rather than a place where she had just fought for her life. Back at the base, everything happened in a blur. Debriefing sessions. Medical checks. Written reports. Sarah answered questions mechanically while her mind struggled to process what had occurred. She had killed people today. Multiple people. She had picked up a weapon and become something she never intended to be. Sleep was impossible that first night back. Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed the battle over and over. Every shot she fired, every face she saw through the scope. The sounds of bullets cracking past her head, the smell of gunpowder and blood and fear. It all merged together into a nightmare that continued even with her eyes open. She got up before dawn and went to the shower facility. The water ran hot and she stood under it until her skin turned red. She scrubbed at the blood on her face and neck. Most of it washed away easily, but some had dried in her hair and took longer to remove. She watched the pink water swirl down the drain and wondered if she would ever feel clean again. The base was quiet at this early hour. Sarah walked to the mess hall and drank bad coffee while watching the sun rise over the desert. Other soldiers filtered in gradually. Some nodded at her. Word had spread about what happened during Operation Steel Thunder. She was no longer just the quiet logistics specialist who counted bullets. Sergeant Harrison found her sitting alone at a corner table. He sat down across from her without asking permission. His weathered face showed concern. He asked how she was holding up. Sarah shrugged and said she was fine. Harrison didn't buy it. He told her that nobody was fine after their first combat experience. It was okay to not be okay. They sat in silence for a while. Then Harrison started talking about his own first combat experience in Iraq many years ago. He described the confusion and terror and the way time seemed to move strangely during a firefight. He talked about the guilt that came after, the wondering if he could have done things differently, the faces he still saw in his dreams. Harrison told her something important. He said that what she felt was normal and human. The day she stopped feeling anything would be the day to worry. Feeling meant she still had her humanity intact. The trick was learning to process those feelings without letting them consume you. Sarah appreciated his words even if they didn't magically make everything better. She asked him if it ever got easier. Harrison considered the question carefully before answering. He said it didn't get easier exactly, but you learned to carry the weight better. You learned to put the memories in a box and only open it when necessary. Over the following days, Sarah tried to return to her normal routine. She reported to the supply depot and went through the familiar motions of her logistics job. She counted ammunition and checked inventory lists. But everything felt different now. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Lieutenant Davis requested a formal meeting with her. Sarah reported to his office feeling nervous. She didn't know what to expect. Davis was a serious man who rarely showed emotion. His office was sparse and organized, exactly what you would expect from a SEAL team leader. Davis got straight to the point. He told her that her actions during the mission had saved lives. Multiple lives. Without someone manning that sniper position, the team likely would have been overrun. He was recommending her for a commendation. Sarah started to protest that she had just done what was necessary, but Davis cut her off. He explained that combat doesn't care about your job title or your official duties. When the situation demands action, you either step up or people die. Sarah had stepped up when it mattered most. That showed character and courage. The military needed people like that in combat roles, not stuck in supply depots. Davis asked if she had ever considered transferring to a combat specialty. Sarah admitted she had thought about it during her weapons training, but never seriously pursued it. She liked logistics. It was safe and predictable. Davis nodded and said that was valid, but he wanted her to really think about it. She had natural talent as a marksman and had proven herself under fire. The meeting ended with Davis telling her to take some time to consider her options. He would support whatever decision she made. As Sarah left his office, her mind spun with possibilities she had never seriously contemplated before. Thompson was evacuated to a better-equipped medical facility for surgery. His shoulder wound required specialist care, but he sent a message through Marcus asking to speak with Sarah when he returned. The message said he owed her a beer and a conversation. Jackson recovered quickly from his leg wound. The bullet had missed major arteries and bone. He was back on light duty within a week, walking with a cane and complaining loudly about being sidelined. When he saw Sarah at the mess hall, he made his way over to her table. Jackson sat down heavily and stretched his injured leg out with a grimace. Then he looked at Sarah seriously and told her he never properly thanked her. She had covered their extraction and taken out at least a dozen enemy fighters during that battle. He counted. She was a certified badass whether she wanted to admit it or not. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise. She insisted she had just done what anyone would do. Jackson laughed and said that was bullshit. Most people would have frozen or panicked. She picked up an unfamiliar weapon system in the middle of a firefight and performed like a seasoned combat sniper. That wasn't luck. That was skill and courage. Word continued spreading through the base about the logistics specialist who became a sniper during Operation Steel Thunder. Soldiers she barely knew nodded respectfully when they passed her. Some stopped to shake her hand or thank her for bringing their friends home alive. The attention made Sarah deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who did what needed doing in a desperate situation, but people saw her differently now. They saw someone who could be counted on when everything went to hell. That reputation carried weight in a military environment. Rodriguez, the mechanic from Texas, found Sarah working in the supply depot. He leaned against a crate and told her the motor pool was buzzing with talk about her. Some of the guys were saying she should get a medal. Others were saying she should join special forces. Rodriguez himself thought she was crazy for picking up that rifle, but crazy in a good way. Sarah laughed despite herself. She told Rodriguez that everyone was making too big a deal out of it. He shook his head and explained that combat changes how people see you. Before she was support staff. Now she was a proven warrior. That changed everything. The base commander called Sarah to his office for a personal meeting. Commander Stevens was a stern career officer who ran the base with rigid discipline. Sarah stood at attention in front of his desk while he reviewed documents about the mission. Stevens looked up at her with an unreadable expression. He said he had read Lieutenant Davis's report multiple times. The account of her actions was remarkable. She had demonstrated initiative, courage, and skill under extreme pressure. The military valued those qualities highly. He informed her that she was being awarded the Bronze Star with Valor device for her actions during Operation Steel Thunder. This was a significant honor. He also wanted to discuss her future career options. The military had invested training in her and she had proven capable of much more than logistics work. Stevens asked directly if she had interest in combat specialties. Advanced marksmanship training. Sniper school, perhaps. or other opportunities that could utilize her demonstrated abilities. Sarah asked for time to consider. Stevens agreed and told her to take a week, but not longer. The military moved fast and opportunities didn't wait forever. Sarah walked out of the commander's office feeling overwhelmed. A Bronze Star, offers of specialized training. Everything was moving so quickly. Just days ago, she was counting ammunition and staying safely away from combat. Now everyone wanted her to become something completely different. She went to visit Marcus in the medical facility. He was treating a soldier with a sprained ankle when she arrived. After finishing, he invited Sarah to his small office. They sat surrounded by medical supplies and anatomy posters. Marcus could see she was struggling with something. He asked what was on her mind. Sarah explained everything. The meeting with Davis, the award, the career offers. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to return to her safe logistics job and forget the whole thing happened. Another part felt pulled toward something more. Marcus listened carefully. Then he shared his own story. He had joined the military as a regular medic with no combat aspirations. But during his first deployment, he found himself treating casualties under fire. He discovered he was good at staying calm in chaos. Eventually, he trained as a combat medic and never looked back. He told Sarah that sometimes life pushes you toward your true calling in unexpected ways. The question wasn't whether she could do the job. She had already proven that. The question was whether she wanted to. Only she could answer that. Sarah spent the next few days in deep contemplation. She walked the perimeter of the base alone, watching the sun set over the desert each evening. She called home and talked to her mother without mentioning what happened or the decisions she faced. Some things were too complicated to explain over a crackling phone connection. She made lists in a notebook. Pros and cons of staying in logistics versus pursuing combat training. Safe versus dangerous. Predictable versus uncertain. Known versus unknown. The logical choice seemed obvious. Stay safe. Do the job she signed up for. Live a longer, less complicated life. But something inside her had changed during that firefight. She had discovered capabilities she never knew existed. She had saved lives. She had made a real difference in a critical moment. Could she go back to counting bullets after experiencing that? Could she sit safely behind the lines knowing she might be needed elsewhere? Sergeant Harrison invited her to the shooting range one evening. They were alone as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Harrison set up targets at various distances and handed Sarah a rifle. He told her to shoot and clear her mind. Sometimes answers came through action rather than thought. Sarah fired methodically at the distant targets. Each shot felt natural and right. The rifle was an extension of her body. The scope showed her exactly where the bullet would go. She controlled something chaotic and made it precise. There was satisfaction in that control. After she emptied several magazines, Harrison spoke. He told her that some people were born to do certain things. They might fight it or deny it, but eventually their true nature emerged. He had watched her progress from a curious beginner to a natural marksman. What happened during Operation Steel Thunder wasn't luck. It was destiny revealing itself. Sarah asked if he really believed in destiny. Harrison shrugged and said he believed people had talents that would manifest given the right circumstances. She had the talent. Now she needed to decide if she had the will. Thompson returned to the base 3 weeks after the mission. His arm was in a sling and he moved stiffly, but he was mobile and healing. He found Sarah in the mess hall and sat down across from her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Thompson extended his good hand and said simply, "Thank you." Sarah shook his hand and told him she was just glad he survived. Thompson laughed and said, "Glad didn't cover it." She had saved not just his life, but everyone's. He wanted her to know that SEALs didn't forget debts. She had proven herself to the team. They talked for over an hour. Thompson described what it felt like to be shot and watching Sarah grab his rifle through his fading consciousness. He thought they were finished. Then he heard that distinctive crack of his rifle firing again and knew someone had taken over. When he learned it was the logistics specialist, he could hardly believe it. Thompson asked what she planned to do now. Sarah admitted she was still deciding. Thompson got serious and told her that talent like hers was rare. The military had plenty of adequate shooters. Great shooters were uncommon. Natural snipers who could perform under extreme stress were almost mythical. She shouldn't waste that gift. The Bronze Star ceremony took place on the parade ground with the entire base in attendance. Sarah stood, in her dress uniform, while Commander Stevens pinned the medal to her chest. He read the citation aloud. describing her actions in formal military language that made it sound more heroic than it felt at the time. Her parents watched via video link from Montana. Her mother cried. Her father stood proud and speechless. Her younger brother sent a message saying his sister was officially the coolest person he knew. The attention and recognition felt surreal to Sarah. After the ceremony, Lieutenant Davis approached her privately. He asked if she had made a decision about her future. Sarah took a deep breath and told him she had. She wanted to pursue sniper training if the opportunity was still available. Davis smiled, a rare expression on his normally serious face. He said the opportunity was definitely still available. In fact, he had already started the preliminary paperwork, assuming she would make the right choice. The SEALs wanted her for their program, but Army Sniper School was also an option. Either path would work. Sarah chose Army Sniper School. It felt like a better fit for her background and personality. The SEALs were elite warriors who lived for combat. Sarah respected them tremendously but didn't feel like she belonged in their culture. Army snipers operated differently, and the training pipeline matched her experience level better. The next months were a blur of paperwork, physical preparation, and waiting for her slot at sniper school. Sarah continued her logistics duties but also trained intensively with Sergeant Harrison. He pushed her harder than ever, knowing what she would face. Sniper school had one of the highest failure rates in the military. Many students arrived with excellent shooting skills but lacked the mental discipline or physical endurance. The course was designed to break people. Only those who refused to quit made it through. Sarah received orders to report to Fort Benning, Georgia for the United States Army Sniper Course. The 7-week program would test everything she thought she knew about shooting and herself. The night before she left the desert base, her friends threw a small going-away gathering. Jackson was there, walking now without his cane. Rodriguez brought contraband beer somehow acquired through his mysterious supply networks. Marcus gave her a combat medic patch as a good luck charm. Chen promised to hack into the school's computers to change her grades if needed, which earned him a punch from Rodriguez. Sergeant Harrison gave her a small notebook filled with his personal notes about wind reading, range estimation, and mental preparation. He told her that sniper school would try to convince her she couldn't do it. The instructors would push her to the breaking point. She needed to remember that she had already proven herself under real combat conditions. School was just school. The flight to Georgia felt endless. Sarah stared out the window at clouds and thought about the path that led her here. A small town girl who joined the military for a paycheck and benefits. A logistics specialist who counted bullets. A soldier who picked up a rifle and became something more. Life was strange and unpredictable. Fort Benning was green and humid, completely different from the desert environment Sarah had grown accustomed to. The training area included wooded terrain, open fields, and complex facilities designed to replicate various combat scenarios. It looked intimidating. Sarah reported with 23 other students. Most were men, though 3 other women were in the class. Everyone came from different military occupational specialties and brought varied experience levels. Some had deployed multiple times. Others had never seen combat. They eyed each other warily, knowing only a fraction would graduate. The instructors were hard-faced veterans with extensive combat experience. They made it clear from day one that they didn't care about anyone's background or previous achievements. Everyone started as equally worthless until they proved otherwise through performance. The first week focused on marksmanship fundamentals. Sarah excelled here. Her training with Sergeant Harrison had prepared her well. She consistently placed in the top 3 shooters during qualification exercises. Some other students struggled with basics, and 2 washed out before the first week ended. The second week introduced fieldcraft and camouflage. Students learned to move invisibly through terrain and construct effective hide sites. This was harder than pure shooting. It required patience and attention to tiny details. Sarah discovered she was naturally good at remaining still for extended periods. Hours of waiting didn't bother her the way it bothered some others. One exercise required students to stalk within 200 yards of observer instructors without being detected. Many students were caught and failed. Sarah moved slowly through the underbrush, taking an hour to cover ground she could walk in 5 minutes. She reached her shooting position undetected and received a perfect score. The physical training was brutal. Long runs with heavy packs. Obstacle courses designed to exhaust. Swimming in full gear. Push-ups and pull-ups until muscles screamed. Sarah wasn't the strongest or fastest student, but she never quit. She finished every exercise, sometimes last but always finished. The mental challenges were even harder than the physical ones. Sleep deprivation was constant. Instructors woke students at random hours for surprise drills. Food was limited. Stress was maximized intentionally. The school wanted to see who could maintain shooting accuracy and tactical decision-making while exhausted and hungry. Students dropped out weekly. Some quit after failing too many exercises. Others were injured and medically rolled back. A few simply decided this life wasn't for them. Each departure was noted without ceremony. The remaining students continued training. Sarah hit a wall during week 4. Everything hurt. Her body was exhausted from constant physical demands. Her mind was foggy from lack of sleep. She missed 3 shots during a crucial qualification exercise, something that hadn't happened since the first week. The instructor's disappointed look cut deeper than any words. That night, lying in her bunk, Sarah seriously considered quitting. She could return to logistics. Nobody would blame her for trying and not making it. Sniper school had defeated better soldiers than her. It would be easier to just give up and go back to the simple life she understood. But then she remembered the faces of the SEALs during Operation Steel Thunder. Lieutenant Davis directing fire while wounded, Jackson fighting with a bullet in his leg, Thompson's blood on the rocks. Those men had never quit, not even when death seemed certain. How could she quit just because training was hard? She pulled out the notebook Sergeant Harrison had given her. On the inside cover, he had written a simple message she hadn't noticed before. It said that the only failure was stopping before you were finished. Everything else was just temporary setback. Sarah got up and went outside to a small training area. She spent 2 hours in the darkness going through weapon drills and breathing exercises. By the time she returned to her bunk, something had shifted. She wasn't quitting. Not today. Not ever. Week 5 brought urban operations training. Students learned to operate in city environments with limited fields of fire and civilian complications. Sarah excelled at calculating angles through buildings and timing shots between moving obstacles. Her mathematical mind, which had served her well in logistics, proved useful for these complex calculations. The final weeks combined everything learned into realistic scenarios. Students conducted multi-day field exercises with minimal support. They had to stalk targets, establish hide sites, engage multiple objectives, and extract without detection. These exercises most closely replicated actual combat operations. Sarah's defining moment came during the final exercise. She was paired with another student named Peterson for a 2-day mission. They had to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, identify specific targets, and engage them from concealment. Observer instructors would try to detect them at every stage. The terrain was wooded and difficult. Sarah and Peterson moved slowly through the darkness, taking hours to cover a few miles. They established their hide site 300 yards from the compound just before dawn. Then came the hardest part, waiting. They lay motionless in their camouflage position as the sun rose and the day grew hot. Insects crawled over them. Sweat pooled beneath their equipment. They couldn't move or speak except in whispered hand signals. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Peterson struggled with the stillness. Sarah could sense his discomfort and growing impatience. She touched his arm once and made a calming gesture. They needed to wait for the right moment. Rushing would compromise everything. Finally, after 8 hours of waiting, their targets appeared. Sarah had one shot to prove her training. She controlled her breathing, calculated the distance and wind, and squeezed the trigger smoothly. The simulation round struck the target perfectly. Peterson fired a second later with equal accuracy. They immediately began their extraction, moving through terrain while observer instructors tried to locate them. Sarah led the way. Using every bit of fieldcraft she had learned, they moved like ghosts through the woods, leaving no traces. They reached the extraction point undetected. The instructor at the extraction point actually smiled, a rare expression. He told them that was one of the best stalking and shooting combinations he had seen in recent classes. They had demonstrated everything a sniper team needed: patience, accuracy, and tactical awareness. Graduation day arrived with a mix of relief and pride. Of the 24 students who started, only 11 finished the course. Sarah stood with the other graduates as the commandant of the sniper school presented their certifications. She was now officially a qualified United States Army sniper. Her parents couldn't attend in person, but they watched the ceremony via video. Her mother cried again, this time with overwhelming pride. Her father sent a message saying he always knew she was destined for something special. Her brother joked that he was now terrified to ever make her angry. After graduation, Sarah received orders to join a specialized unit that operated in various combat zones. She would deploy with teams that needed precision marksman support. It was exactly the challenge she had been preparing for. Before deploying, she received an unexpected message. Lieutenant Davis wanted to speak with her. He was back stateside briefly between missions. They met at a coffee shop near the base. a strange setting for two soldiers accustomed to combat zones. Davis looked tired but satisfied. He told Sarah that he had followed her progress through sniper school. Her instructors had provided glowing reports. The SEALs were disappointed she didn't join them, but respected her choice. He wanted her to know that the door was always open if she changed her mind. Sarah thanked him but explained she was happy with her current path. Davis nodded and said he understood. Then he got serious and told her something important. Combat would never be easy, and taking lives would always carry weight. But she was doing necessary work. She was saving American lives by eliminating threats. That mattered. He shared that Thompson had fully recovered and was back with the team. Jackson was also operational again. Both sent their regards and reminded her that she was always welcome at any SEAL team facility. Once you saved a SEAL's life, you were family. That bond didn't break. Sarah's first deployment took her back to a desert environment similar to where everything started. She joined a team conducting counterterrorism operations. Her role was providing overwatch during dangerous missions. She protected her teammates from her hidden positions. The work was dangerous and exhausting. She spent long hours in uncomfortable positions, watching through her scope while her team operated below. She engaged enemy fighters when necessary, always with precision and without hesitation. She had become what she trained to be. A professional sniper between missions, she sometimes thought about the frightened girl who counted ammunition and stayed safely away from combat. That person felt like someone from another lifetime. Sarah had changed fundamentally during that helicopter crash and the desperate battle that followed. She wrote letters home but couldn't explain most of what she did. Her family knew she was in a dangerous job but not the specific details. That was fine. Some experiences couldn't be shared with people who hadn't lived them. They could only be understood by others who had faced similar challenges. Sergeant Harrison stayed in contact through email when connections were available. He told her he was proud but not surprised. He had seen her potential from the beginning. She just needed the right circumstances to reveal it. Sometimes people needed to be pushed into their true calling. Sarah thought about that often. If the helicopter hadn't crashed, if Thompson hadn't been wounded, if circumstances hadn't forced her to pick up that rifle, would she ever have discovered this part of herself? Probably not. She would have finished her logistics contract and returned to civilian life, never knowing what she was capable of becoming. Life was strange that way. You could plan everything perfectly, and one unexpected moment could change your entire trajectory. The question wasn't whether life would throw you into chaos. The question was how you responded when it did. Sarah had responded by doing what was necessary. She picked up a weapon and fought. She refused to quit when training became difficult. She embraced a calling she never knew existed. Not everyone got the chance to discover their true potential. She felt fortunate, despite the danger and difficulty years later. After multiple deployments and countless missions, Sarah would look back on that day in the desert as the moment her real life began. Everything before was just preparation. Everything after was purpose. She kept the bronze star in a drawer, rarely looking at it. The medal wasn't what mattered. What mattered was knowing she had made a difference when it counted. She had saved lives. She had protected her teammates. She had become someone reliable in the worst circumstances. The military eventually promoted her and gave her leadership responsibilities. She trained other soldiers in marksmanship and tactical thinking. She shared the lessons she learned through hard experience. Some of her students had natural talent. Others struggled but persevered. She saw parts of her younger self in all of them. Sarah never forgot where she came from. She had been a logistics specialist who counted bullets and stayed safe. Then circumstances demanded more and she had risen to meet them. That journey taught her something valuable about human potential. Everyone had capabilities they hadn't discovered yet. Everyone was stronger than they believed. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary often came down to one moment. One decision. One refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. She shared this philosophy with her students. She told them that being a sniper wasn't just about shooting accurately. It was about staying calm when chaos erupted around you. It was about doing difficult things when no one would blame you for failing. It was about discovering you were capable of more than you ever imagined. Some students understood immediately. Others needed time and experience to grasp the deeper meaning.